The year's 1872. The air is thick with the acrid smoke of London's bustling industrial revolution. Beneath the grand facades of progress lies a dark reality. One where children as young as 10 are labeled criminals and subjected to unspeakable punishments for crimes so petty they seem almost trivial. But for Victorian society, justice was uncompromising and brutal, even for the youngest offenders. In the dimly lit corridors of Wandsworth Prison, a new tool of the justice system was being put to use. These haunting photographs were meant to catalog offenders, but they inadvertently became an enduring testament to the cruel fates of children thrust into a merciless system. One of these children was George Davey, a boy of just 10 years. His crime? Stealing 2 pet rabbits. The punishment? A month of hard labor, a grueling sentence that saw him toiling alongside hardened adult criminals. His small hands, better suited for play, were now blistered from labor meant to break the spirit of even the toughest men. Standing next to George in the prison registry was William Jowers, age 12. He too had stolen a rabbit, and he too was sentenced to a month of hard labor. The innocence of childhood was stripped from these boys, replaced by the cold reality of the Victorian penal system. Then there was James Ledbetter, a wiry 11-year-old whose crime was plucking celery from a market stall. For this, he received 4 days of hard labor and the sting of a birch cane, 10 lashes delivered with precision, to instill both pain and fear. The Victorian justice system made no distinction between the crimes of men and those of children. Poverty-stricken children, often stealing out of desperation, were treated as though they were hardened criminals. Take Thomas Goodstone, aged 14, who dared to steal 7 pounds of pork during the Christmas season, a time when most families were feasting while as likely starved. For this, he was sentenced to 14 days of back-breaking hard labor. Even the youngest and smallest were not spared. 11-year-old Thomas Savage was caught stealing iron. His sentence mirrored James Ledbetter. 4 days of hard labor and 10 lashes. Each stroke of the cane was a grim reminder that society demanded a price for every transgression, no matter how small. For Tammy Puplet, a 14-year-old girl, the stakes were even higher. Her theft of 12 shillings, a half bottle of gin, and 3 shirt studs earned her 3 months of hard labor, a sentence that would crush even an adult, let alone a young girl. Prison life for these children was a waking nightmare. Wandsworth, like many Victorian prisons, was designed not for rehabilitation but for punishment. Cells were damp and cold, with little light filtering through the barred windows. Meals were meager. Bread, gruel, and water, and offered just enough sustenance to keep inmates alive. The work was relentless. Children were forced to break stones, pick oakum, or perform other grueling tasks under the watchful eyes of unyielding wardens. For the youngest, these punishments were more than just physically exhausting, they were soul-crushing, and the lashings handed out with grim regularity left scars both visible and invisible. Each stroke of the birch cane was a message. Society would tolerate no crime, no matter the age or circumstance of the offender. Victorian England was a society gripped by fear of lawlessness. The rapid growth of cities and the stark divide between rich and poor created fertile ground for crime, or at least the perception of it. Lawmakers and the public alike believed that harsh punishments were the only way to maintain order. Children who stole to survive were seen not as victims of their circumstances, but as budding criminals who needed to be deterred through severe penalties. The mugshots taken at Wandsworth Prison were part of a broader effort to document and track offenders. Photography was still a novel technology, but its potential as a tool for law enforcement was clear. For children like George, William, and Tammy, these photographs immortalized a moment of shame and suffering. Their young faces, weary and resigned, told stories that words could not fully capture. These images were more than just tools for the police. They were a warning to the public. Each photo carried the unspoken message: this could happen to your child if they stray from the path of righteousness. The grim realities of the Victorian justice system did begin to change until the early 20th century. In 1908, the Children's Act introduced juvenile courts and prohibited children from being sent to adult prisons. This marked a shift in how society viewed young offenders. No longer were they seen as miniature adults, deserving of harsh punishments. Instead, there was a growing recognition that children needed guidance, education, and support. But for the children of the 1870s, such compassion came too late. The mugshots of Victorian child criminals serve as a haunting reminder of a time when the line between justice and cruelty was perilously thin. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about how society once treated its most vulnerable members. Today we view juvenile offenders through a lens of understanding and rehabilitation. But as we look at the faces of George, William, James, and Tammy, we must remember that this progress was hard-won. These children, long forgotten by history, remind us of the dangers of a justice system that prioritizes punishment over empathy. They urge us to continue striving for fairness and compassion, not just for children, but for all. Their stories may have been born in darkness, but by remembering them, we shine a light on the progress we've made in the work that still lies ahead.